What happens when a family closes its doors so tightly that no voices, no lives, no futures can enter or leave? In the middle of the 9th century, one farmstead did just that. Its records blur its traces thin. Its walls remembered more for silence than for song. At the center stood a brother Elias H., who would one by one take each of his 4 sisters as his wife. And one by one, each of them died. Their graves unsettled, their names crossed out in a ledger that still survives. No heirs, no explanations. Only silence and the kind of rumors that linger when absence feels heavier than presence. You're watching Gothic Ledger, where we uncover the histories others would rather leave buried. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from, and at what hour of the night or day this story has reached you. And if you want more tales of family secrets and the shadows they leave behind, subscribe and let the ledger remain open. Some families close their doors for privacy. Others close them to bury what lives inside. At the edge of a sparsely settled county, bordered on 3 sides by pine thicket, and on the 4th by marshland, stood the H farmstead. Its borders were more than wood and soil. They were boundaries against the world itself. Neighbors rarely crossed its fences, and when they did, they spoke of quiet. No laughter, no cries of children, no easy conversation across the yard. Only the dry rhythmic strike of tools against the earth. When census takers came through, men tasked with noting even the most scattered of households, they made a strange observation. The H family stood alone, with no neighbors listed for 3 miles in any direction. Church records, usually a place of interwoven lives, showed baptisms, burials, but never marriages that led away from the farm. The family line read like a circle, sealed, unbroken, feeding only on itself. The father had once been visible. His name appeared on land agreements, on inventories of livestock. He signed his hand steady and bold. Then, without warning, he disappeared from the records. The last trace is a death note at the courthouse, the ink faltering mid-stroke as though the hand holding the pen had weakened. After that, nothing. No obituary, no burial, not even the smallest mention in parish logs. His absence left a space, and into that space stepped Elias. Elias did not announce himself. No ceremony marked his rise. His name simply replaced his father's on crop ledgers, on tax rolls, on supply orders. But his script was different, sharper, heavier, as though he pressed the nib into the page with deliberate force, insistent that his presence would not be overlooked. Those who dealt with him in the county seat remarked on his composure. Controlled, silent, speaking only enough to sign his name and complete his business. The sisters, by contrast, seemed to dissolve. Their names appeared faintly, a set of initials penciled into a pew list, a few small purchases at the general store. But no one remembered seeing them walk in town. No one recalled them beyond the farm gates. Some whispered that Elias forbade them from leaving. Others whispered the sisters themselves no longer wished to. Either way, the H farmstead grew into a sealed chamber, turned inward, cut off from the life flowing beyond its fences. And yet, rumors clung to the silence. Hunters passing through pine claimed to hear voices carried on the wind, sometimes like prayer, sometimes like argument, but never clear enough to decipher. A few laborers hired briefly for harvest said the doors of the main house opened only by Elias's hand. They spoke of locked halls of meals taken in shadows, of an awe inside that felt stifling, even in daylight. By the year following the father's disappearance, the transformation was complete. No one called it the H family farm anymore. It was Elias H's farm with others listed beneath his name, not as kin, not even as individuals, but as dependents. Shadows beneath a single head of household. The farmstead's separation hardened into permanence. Its doors were no longer shut against intrusion, they were shut against exposure. The community learned to speak of the H family only in whispers, measuring them not by what they did, but by how absent they remained. And within those borders, Elias stood as master, as gatekeeper, as the only visible figure in a household already beginning to erase itself. Her marriage lasted 3 winters. Her grave lasted longer. Parish ledgers show that within a season of the father's vanishing, Elias married his eldest sister Miriam. The record is faint, a line so narrow, it seems written to be overlooked. Elias H. wedded to Miriam H. No witnesses, no congregation. A marriage not shared with the community, but bound in silence as though the very act of writing it was meant only for the ledger and never for the world. The villagers whispered, but no law intervened. In rural parishes where distance and scarcity often excused irregularities, marriages sometimes slipped past proper ritual. Yet here the omission was glaring. No bans were published, no priest presided. Only a folded sheet returned to the courthouse, carrying Elias's sharp signature, made the union official. Miriam's name, thereafter, vanished from public registers, folded into her brother's as if her life had been rewritten in smaller ink. Outwardly, nothing changed. The fields were ploughed, debts paid, livestock bartered. But Miriam herself was seldom seen. On rare occasions when neighbors glimpsed her crossing, to the well pausing at the edge of the property, they remarked on her pallor, her eyes cast downward, her silence like a shadow heavier than illness. No children came, no celebrations marked years passing. Only the stillness deepened. 3 winters later, her death appeared in parish records described with unsettling vagueness. Lung fever. A phrase so elastic in the mid-century it might have meant influenza, pneumonia, or any wasting sickness. No physician's name followed, no coroner's note trailed it. The line stood alone, a record that seemed reluctant even to exist. Her burial carried the same silence. No bells tolled, no procession passed the lanes. At night, neighbors said the sound of spades rang faintly from behind the barn. By dawn, a mound of disturbed soil was visible, marked only by a plank driven into the earth. No priest had spoken. No prayers were uttered. The absence of ritual weighed on the villagers heavier than death itself. It felt less like a passing than an erasure. Still, no objections were filed. The court recorded nothing further. The law, distant and indifferent, allowed the matter to settle into dust. Miriam, once eldest, daughter, then wife, then widow in silence, was reduced to a grave behind the barn and a single faint line in the parish book. No letters survive, no possessions bear her name. And yet, the neighbors swore that soil would not lie still. Season after season, it seemed to shift, as though the earth itself resisted the denial of a proper resting place. In the months that followed, Elias stepped into yet another role husband to Ruth, the second sister. The transition appeared seamless, as though continuity within the household mattered more than propriety. Again, the parish register reduced the union to a single line, Elias H. joined to Ruth H. Again, no witnesses, no congregation, only silence. What drew more notice than the marriage itself were the property ledgers. Suddenly, several parcels of land transferred under Ruth's name. A maneuver not of sentiment but of strategy, binding her identity to the soil. The handwriting was Elias's firm and deliberate. Ruth's mark appeared beneath not a signature but a wavering cross, as if drawn under compulsion rather than will. Her presence in the village was as faint as Miriam's had been. Glimpses at the window, a shadow at the well. Never conversation, never acknowledgement. By spring, Ruth's name shifted again from property rolls to death registers. The cause accident with cattle. The phrasing unsettled many. Farm accidents were not rare, but they left unmistakable evidence: shattered bones, torn garments, bruises shaped by hooves and horns. Ruth's body, by contrast, bore none. Her bones unbroken, her dress intact, her face pale and still, as though she had simply lain down upon the dirt and ceased to draw breath. Elias explained that the herd had spooked, driving her to the ground. No physician was summoned, no coroner called. The record was sealed. Her grave was dug near Miriam's, shallow and unmarked. Now the villagers' unease grew sharper. Two sisters taken in marriage, buried in silence, each erased under vague diagnoses. But to speak suspicion aloud was to risk scandal, even danger. Easier to whisper, easier to fall quiet. And so, the silence deepened. Yet, the pattern was visible even then. A marriage entered. Property signed, a death declared. Each stage inscribed like lines in a ledger already written. Miriam's lung fever, Ruth's cattle accident. Both explanations vague enough to evade inquiry, both endings swift enough to prevent heirs. By year's end, Elias's authority stood absolute. The sisters lay beneath unsettled earth. The household remained sealed. And the farmstead, instead of flourishing with life, seemed to move only in cycles of disappearance. By the second winter after Ruth's death, neighbors began to notice disturbances in the ground behind the H-barn. The graves once raised mounds with rough wooden markers began to shift. Planks that stood like crude headboards leaned, sank, and finally disappeared. At first, villagers explained it: away frost and thaw, shallow burials, animals nosing at disturbed soil. Rural earth rarely held still. But those who came near hunters, straying at dusk, laborers hired briefly spoke in lower tones. The ground did not look weathered. It looked worked, as if spades had been set to it again and again, until the mounds themselves dissolved into flat pasture. When Miriam's grave was glanced at more closely, no coffin lay beneath. The soil had collapsed inward, revealing only clay. Ruth's grave, too, gaped with emptiness. Whether coffins had been removed or never placed there at all became the substance of rumor. Some whispered that Elias unearthed them under cover of night, dragging them to some hidden place on the property. Others suspected no burials had ever occurred, that the mounds were illusions, earth piled to quiet suspicion. No official inquiry followed. In remote counties, the dead belonged to their kin, and the church seldom intervened unless summoned. Parish ledgers make no mention of exhumation, no record of transfer. Yet, whispers multiplied. That Elias had hidden his sisters in the barn, that he had sunk their coffins into the marsh. That beneath the farmhouse itself, a vault was being filled. With time, even the pretense of graves vanished. Grass spread evenly where mounds once rose. New workers brought to harvest asked where the burial ground was, only to be told there was none. Silence became a crop Elias cultivated as carefully as wheat. Decades later, a survey map drawn during a land dispute noted dotted lines behind the barn. The surveyor added a small remark: soil indicates prior disturbance, no markers visible. That marginal phrase is the closest evidence that Miriam and Ruth were ever placed in the earth at all. Among the villagers, unease gave way to resignation. The vanishing of the graves became one more subject, unspoken past only as warning. Parents told children not to wander near the H farm, for the earth there swallowed whatever was placed upon it. For Elias, the absence of graves served his silence. Without markers, without memorial memory, itself dissolved. The sisters were reduced to rumor, their names preserved only in ledgers and whispers. By spring, the pasture looked untouched, as though no graves had ever been dug. It was then that Elias entered into marriage with the third sister, Esther. The parish register leaves only a blank space, lines drawn as if awaiting details never supplied. No banns, no priest, no witnesses. A marriage acknowledged not by words but by silence. Esther's life became even more confined than her sister's. Miriam had once been glimpsed in the yard, Ruth at the well. Esther was never seen outside at all. Neighbors reported only shadows crossing curtained windows, the brief flicker of lamplight against glass. Her name appeared nowhere in court records, no parcels of land tied to her, no contracts signed. The only trace is her sudden entry into the death register, unaccompanied by explanation. The discovery was strange. A farmhand delivering supplies found the parlor door sealed from within. When it was finally opened, Esther lay on the bed, already arranged. Her hands folded, her hair combed neatly across her shoulders, her dress chosen as if for burial. It was less a scene of death than a tableau set in place. Elias told those who asked that she had passed quietly in her sleep. No physician was summoned. No coroner was called. The parish record notes only Esther H. deceased. Natural causes. The clerk's handwriting marks it, but villagers swore the words came directly from Elias, repeated and written without question. Even in remote places, unexplained deaths usually drew at least cursory examination. But Esther's left, none. No illness recorded, no notice of burial. Only Elias's word and another secret intimate. Neighbors whispered of confinement, that the shutters had been nailed shut for months before her death, that she had wasted to nothing inside those walls. Whether by illness, neglect, or design, her fate was erased as thoroughly as Miriam's and Ruth's before her. No grave for Esther appears on parish maps. No marker, no mound. Whether she was buried in the same churned ground or hidden elsewhere in the farmstead remains unknown. By the year's close, Esther's existence was reduced to rumor and a blank line, as though she had slipped from life into silence without ever being allowed the dignity of presence. The household, once 4 sisters and a father, had narrowed to 1. Elias stood alone 3 times, widowed his farmstead, a house where silence seemed more permanent than life itself. The ledger that would later reveal fragments of this story was not discovered until decades after the house fell into ruin, long after the land had changed hands. It lay forgotten in county archives, slipped between tax receipts and livestock inventories, waiting for someone to notice. The ledger appeared ordinary at first glance. A simple book, bound in weathered leather, its spine cracked, its pages fragile with age. Nothing about its shape or cover hinted at what it held inside. At the beginning, the writing seemed harmless. Elias's careful script, cataloging harvest yields, livestock numbers, debts paid and collected. The handwriting was steady, measured a man devoted to order. But partway through, the purpose of the book shifted. No longer columns of grain or cattle. Instead, names. The first Miriam age. Beside it, the date of a marriage. Then a date of death. The line was crossed through firm and final. The second Ruth age. Again, a marriage date followed by a death. The stroke that erased her was darker, pressed so hard, the nib nearly tore the paper. The third, Esther H. Her name shook upon the page, letters wavering. The date of her death was overwritten, blurred as if Elias's hand faltered. Yet the line came all the same, struck through, erasing her. And the fourth, Leah H., the youngest sister. No marriage date at all, only her name written beside Elias's own, then an empty space. Lower down, a death date hastily scrawled. The cross through it was crooked, uneven stained, where ink had bled under a trembling hand. The ledger showed not only records, but the steady unraveling of a man's mind. What began with control gave way to hesitation, and then to collapse. What should have been a farmer's account book had become a private confession, not of harvests, but of lives bound to him and extinguished. What haunted readers most was the silence between the lines. No notes of cause, no mention of children, no possessions passed on. Only the pattern wife-sister date of union date of death. Each struck through as if Elias believed his role was not only to bind them in marriage, but to erase them in death. The ledger's survival itself became a mystery. Why was it preserved? Was it surrendered with his estate or hidden away by someone who knew its weight? The archivist who uncovered it admitted feeling a heaviness in turning its pages, handling something never meant for public eyes. At the end, Elias's hand disintegrated entirely. Figures tilted at strange angles, sums, abandoned ink, blotting, where the pen lingered too long. What began as precise accountancy decayed into fragments like a mind breaking under its own repetitions, and yet it remains the only surviving record that binds all four sisters together. Miriam, Ruth, Esther, Leah, each one written, each one crossed out. Their graves are gone, their official records erased, but their names endure, trapped in a single book where silence itself becomes the loudest entry. Leah, the youngest, had always been the least seen. Miriam carried the dignity of the eldest. Ruth, the burden of property transfers. Esther, the quiet shadow kept behind shutters. But Leah was remembered only in passing fragments. A voice at the well, a fleeting figure in the barn doorway. She became Elias's fourth wife, completing a cycle, whispered but never spoken aloud. Parish records fall to silence here. For Esther, a blank had been left where her marriage line should have been. For Leah, there was not even that. In the census that followed, Elias H. appeared alone, household of 5 reduced to 2, the second unnamed. Soon even that vanished, leaving only Elias himself. Her death was never entered. No priest gave rites, no coroner signed a certificate, no grave was dug in view of neighbors. Yet, villagers swore they still saw her after she should have been gone. They spoke of the upstairs window curtains always drawn, but never quite shut. At dusk, a pale figure lingered there unmoving. Hunters crossing the woods at night saw lamplight glowing upstairs, long after Elias ceased to appear outdoors. Some believed Leah lived on hidden and confined until she wasted away. Others whispered she had died early, her body kept within those rooms. And still others, more fearful, said it was not her body at all, but her shadow. The younger sister bound to the house, circling endlessly in the pane of glass. No document clarifies her fate. In Elias's estate papers, she is absent. No widow, no death, nothing but her name scratched into the ledger. Her sisters bore death dates in his hand. Leah bore only silence. The farmhouse itself seemed to conspire in the ambiguity. When neighbors' descendants dared enter its ruins, decades later, they found the upstairs nailed shut. Doors, warped windows, locked from the inside. Dust lay heavy, but footprints crossed the floor as if someone had moved long after the house should have stood empty. Of all the sisters, Leah's absence is the most haunting. Miriam's grave vanished. Ruth's accident contradicted itself. Esther's shuttered room suggested confinement. But Leah was consumed by silence, her body lost to record to earth to time. She exists only as rumor through glass, a name crossed out in ink, a question the house itself refused to answer. The youngest, the last. Whether she left in life, in death, or never left at all, remains unbroken silence to this day. And across 4 marriages, not a single heir was recorded for Elias H. Parrish, baptism books, census rolls, inheritance claims silent. In rural farmsteads of the 19th century, families grew large children always noted, yet the H farm yielded none. Later observers suggested inbreeding had closed the loop. Cousin or sibling unions producing stillbirths or sterility. Secrecy itself became a kind of legacy. But the silence was never absolute. Rumors drifted. Laborers swore they heard faint cries at night, the unmistakable sound of infants carried on the wind. Others claimed to have seen small bundles of cloth carried quickly across the yard toward the well. No record confirms it. Yet, the whispers repeated across decades unchanging, as if the truth clung to memory, even when written words refused it. After Elias's death, when the land was left to rot, farmers plowing the soil near the well struck something strange. Not stone. Fragile shards, surfaced bones too small for livestock. They were gathered and rebreed without inquiry. No coroner called, no priest summoned. The matter folded into the larger silence of the farmstead. On paper, Elias died, leaving only disputes over land. No heirs came forward. But in memory, the suggestion lingered of hidden births, hidden burials, a legacy both factual and spectral. The absence of any official acknowledgement only deepened suspicion that something had been deliberately erased. No forensic study was ever attempted. The fragments were too few, too fragile, already lost to soil and season. What survives comes only from local memory. A rusted crib found in the loft of the barn, its mattress blackened with mildew. swaddling cloths stuffed into the cavity of a wall clotted with damp and age. Objects without names, suggestive yet inconclusive. The silence of the farmstead thus grew twofold. No heirs to carry on the name, no graves to hold those who may have lived unseen. The household remained barren, not only in life, but in record, producing nothing but rumor and the occasional fragment rising to the surface of plowed earth. Elias's legacy was not continuity but interruption. His line ended with himself, despite 4 marriages, despite 4 erased sisters. What endured was suspicion that beneath the ground, near the stagnant well, lay the faint remains of children never permitted to be known. The farm bore no heirs. Yet, in its fields, absence itself became a form of presence heavier than any child's cry could have been. By his final decade, Elias H. had become utterly solitary. The farmstead reduced to 1 man. No laborers stayed to help at harvest, no neighbors came to borrow tools. The house that once held father, mother, and daughters narrowed to a single occupant. Census takers recorded only his name. The columns meant for children, boarders or servants stood blank. The house bore the slow collapse of neglect. Windows cracked, shutters sagged, the roof bowed inward under storms. Yet Elias remained, planting the same furrows each year, keeping ledgers that dwindled into fragments. Where once he tallied grain and livestock, the entries reduced to terse notations. Corn 3 bushels, hog sold. The script thinned, then faltered altogether. Villagers passing by remarked on his figure in the yard, bent but steady, or seated motionless on the porch. He spoke to no one. The ground near the barn, once whispered to hold the sisters' graves, lay uncultivated. Instead of working it, Elias often stood before it, unmoving, as though waiting for the soil to give something back. When he was found, his body rested not in a bed, but in a rocking chair placed deliberately to face the earth behind the barn. His hands lay calmly on the armrests, his eyes fixed outward toward the patch of ground tied to Miriam, Ruth Esther, and Leah, buried or pretended to be. No marks of struggle touched his body. The chair rocked faintly in a draught from a broken window, refusing to remain still. His will offered only silence. No mention of wives, no sisters, no heirs, no division of land. The estate was left to the household, a phrase that baffled clerks, for the household consisted of only himself, and even that had ended. The county seized the land for debts, divided it, and sold it at auction. Elias vanished from record as quietly as the women before him. No stone marks his grave. No line continues his name. What remains is silence. The farmstead emptied the ledger with 4 names crossed through the fields, swallowing whatever graves had once been. Elias remained what he had always been, a solitary figure presiding over absence. A man with 4 wives, yet always alone. Some stories are too disturbing for records. They survive only as silence. When the county reviewed the matter, the file closed with a single phrase, family tragedy. No heirs, property absorbed. Bureaucracy imposed finality, yet the silence on the page was its own testimony. None of the sisters appeared again in census or parish record. It was as though Miriam, Ruth, Esther, and Leah had never existed, erased the moment they were bound to Elias. Only the ledger with names struck through preserves them. The farmstead itself decayed into the earth within a generation. Roof beams collapsed, fields overgrew. The barn sank into mud until only a stone foundation showed. County maps eventually omitted the property, drawing blank pasture, where a household had once stood. Yet, its absence did not erase memory. Locals kept the story alive in whispers. They spoke of dusk settling on the fields when 4 figures appeared walking silently at the far edges of the land. Women in plain dresses, indistinct, keeping distance from each other, circling the farmhouse, but never approaching. Witnesses said they moved without sound, their forms fading into twilight, as though bound to repeat some ritual of distance. Some dismissed it as superstition told to frighten children. Yet, accounts remained strangely consistent. Even decades apart, neighbors described the same 4 shadows keeping vigil over earth that no longer bore their graves. The farmhouse itself was avoided, shunned, as if it held the source of what tethered them there. No official inquiry was ever made. Folklore rarely draws the archivist's pen, but the silence of county record left space for whispers to take root. Today the land looks no different from the fields around it, yet its boundaries are remembered. Farmers plow around it, steering clear of where the farmhouse once stood. Children dare each other to step into the tall grass at dusk, though few linger long. The air feels heavy, as though it carries the weight of erased names. The H family left no descendants, no monuments, no legacy but absence. What remains is the impression of a household folded in on itself until nothing escaped, not even memory, except in the form of shadows circling the edge of a field. Some stories end with explanation. Others endure only as unease. The H farmstead belongs to the latter, a silence preserved not by record, but by the unsettling persistence of what refuses to be forgotten.